Denver rose out of the plains with a hard edge, the mountains behind it like a promise you could never quite cash. Michael drove the last miles without music, the sound of the road enough to keep him alert. Price sat quiet with the map folded small in his lap. On one corner, in neat block letters, he had written a name, L. Carson. They cut through the city's morning traffic and parked near a narrow brick building on a side street. No sign on the door. No list of offices. Just a buzzer, a camera that may or may not have been plugged in, and a plaque that read Suite 203. Price pressed the button. A beat later the lock clicked. The hallway smelled of floor wax and old paper. At the end, a door stood ajar. A man in a dark suit stood inside, silver hair combed back, rectangular glasses catching the light. He looked like the kind of person you trusted by accident, neutral, well-kept, not eager to be liked. "Leonard," he said, voice low. "You still bring storms with you." "Larry," Price answered. "You still build roofs." They shook hands in a way that said they had once stood in worse rooms. Michael introduced himself, and Carson gave a small nod as if he already knew the name. The office was spare, a desk, 2 chairs, a metal cabinet, a single plant trying its best near the window. Carson gestured to the chairs. "Let's do this fast and clean. You brought what we discussed?" Michael glanced at Price. Price gave the faintest nod. Michael lifted his satchel onto the desk and took out the drive with the scans and the small camera with Whitaker's photos. He did not mention the box in the car. That was the rule. Carson produced a small flatbed scanner from the cabinet and set it on the desk. "I'll make the copy and store it off-site. Name you give me goes on the envelope, nothing else. If anyone asks for it, they won't know what to ask for." He worked quickly, hands steady, movements neat. The scanner light swept back and forth in a soft rhythm. Michael watched the screen fill with images, memos with boring headers that meant too much, maps with circles, pages with tight margins and strange notations. Carson said nothing, only checked each file as it saved, building a mirrored set with care. "Where does off-site mean?" Michael asked finally. Carson's mouth flickered, almost a smile. "A place with locks that aren't on a lease." "Do you believe any of this?" Michael asked. "I believe paper," Carson said. "Paper outlives men who lie." Price looked toward the window. "How many of these have you stored?" Carson slid the next page under the glass. "Enough to know how to carry them." He finished the scans and turned to the camera. Michael handed him the memory card. Carson slotted it into a reader and waited for the thumbnails to appear: the shed, the box, the kitchen table, the pages marked Aurora Subproject. He paused on the photo of the badge, leaned closer, then moved on without comment. When he was done, he made 2 encrypted copies, one on a drive he sealed with a numbered tag, and another on a slim card he tucked into a plain envelope. He wrote a name on the envelope and slid it to Michael. "If we get separated," he said, "this is the one you keep in your shoe, not your pocket." Michael took the envelope and felt its thin weight. It was less than the box, but the idea inside it was just as heavy. Carson cleaned the scanner with a cloth and stored it away, then faced them fully. "Now tell me what you didn't bring upstairs." Michael and Price didn't answer. Carson waited, then nodded once as if that was the answer he expected. "Good. You learn." He opened a drawer and produced a small notepad. He wrote without looking up. "You can expect a polite visit within 48 hours. Someone will ask about routine matters and look for the thing you didn't mention. If they don't find it, they'll adjust their tone. If they do find a hint of it, they will offer help. Do not accept help." "Who sends them?" Michael asked. Carson tore off the top sheet and folded it twice. "There is no single who. There are habits. Someone who reads changes in inventory logs, or a liaison who notices a box pulled out of turn, or an old friend in an agency who gets a nudge to check in. Their names change. Their faces don't matter. The habit is the same." Price leaned back. "We're heading west." Carson looked up sharply. "How far west?" "Far," Price said simply. "There's a site. Echo Point." Carson's jaw tightened a fraction. He did not write the name down. "You'll need a place to pause that isn't a motel." 2 turns off a road that doesn't have a name. I can give you one. He drew a small map, an exit, a frontage road, a right at a broken fence, a dirt track to a low building. It was meant to store documents for litigation that never came. Key is under a brick by the door. There's a safe inside. If you need to sleep without the weight at your feet, you use that safe and then you leave before the sun thinks to check. Michael took the map. Why help us? Carson looked at him for a long second. Because the last time I didn't help someone like you, the thing they carried disappeared and so did they. The room went still. Outside, a siren wandered past and moved on. Carson took a breath he had been holding. One more thing, he said. He pulled a small device from the drawer and set it on the desk. It's a passive tag reader. Walk slowly around your car with it. If it chirps, you'll know where to peel. Michael's throat felt dry. They would tag us? They would tag the car, Carson corrected. It's easier to follow steel than bone. They left a few minutes later with a drive they did not keep and an envelope Michael did. Carson watched them go from the window, his hand still on the blind cord as if to remind himself not to lift it. In the parking lot, the air had warmed. Michael and Price walked to the car without speaking. The box still slept under the blanket in the trunk. Michael opened the passenger door and took the device Carson had given them. It fit in his hand like a deck of cards. He pressed the button. It made no sound. He began at the rear bumper and moved slowly forward, the device in his palm. Nothing. He reached the front quarter panel. A sharp, neat chirp broke the morning. They both froze. Michael pressed the button again and moved the reader closer to the wheel well. The chirp sounded again, short and sure. They both froze. Michael pressed the button again and moved the reader closer to the wheel well. The chirp sounded again, short and sure. Top of the arch, Price said quietly. Where the liner hides a magnet. He crouched, reached in with 2 fingers, and came away with something the size of a coin, matte black, a smear of road dust across its face. He held it. A dot of old adhesive clung to the back. Michael stared at it. It felt like the first time he had seen the word Eclipse on a folder, the sense that a door had just opened in front of them and behind them at the same time. Throw it away? Michael asked. Use it, Price said. He took a small steel lunch tin from his bag and dropped the tag inside. He closed the lid and handed it to Michael. We'll let it ride a different car for a while. They walked 2 blocks to a public lot and knelt beside a pickup with a sagging ladder rack. Price slid the tin onto the frame brace above the rear tire and tapped it twice to set the magnet. It held. Back at their own car, Michael felt the silence shift shape. It wasn't the silence of being watched. It was the silence of having moved a piece on a board someone else thought they controlled. They didn't hang around to see whether anyone noticed. Price slipped behind the wheel. They took a different street than the one they came in on, then another, and then a ramp that pushed them west with the rest of the day. They stopped once more at a car wash on the edge of the city. Michael sprayed the wheel wells, the undercarriage, the places where grit hid magnets well. Price watched the road. By the time they pulled out, the sun had lowered to that hour where shadows look like traps and bridges look like teeth. Michael unfolded Carson's small map. The lines were simple. The arrows were clean. He could almost feel the safe place the lines pointed to. A brief sleep without waking every 10 minutes to listen for steps. He folded the map again and put it in the dash. You believe Carson? He asked. I believe his habits, Price said. He keeps paper alive. He keeps men uncertain. Both are useful to us. An echo point? Michael said. Price's hand tightened on the wheel. We go to the place where echoes come from. The city shrank in the mirror. The mountains drew their line. The road unwound, a ribbon into late light. Somewhere behind them, a signal went quiet. Somewhere ahead, a storage unit door waited for a key under a brick. For the first time all day, Michael felt something like balance. They had made a copy. They had moved a piece. They had not been erased. Not yet. He looked out at the long, flat light and said, mostly to himself, we keep going. The mountains rose slowly as the city fell behind them. Michael drove with Carson's hand-drawn map folded on the seat beside him, the paper creased at all the right angles as if it had been folded and refolded for years. Price sat quietly, his eyes fixed out the window, watching the world change from city glass to scrubland to the hard stone edges of foothills. By late afternoon, the road thinned. The exit Carson had drawn appeared almost casually, just another break in the guardrail marked by a worn sign for a frontage road. Michael steered them down, the tires hitting gravel and dust. The track ran straight, then bent right at a fence whose boards were split and leaning. Beyond it, a low structure appeared, half warehouse, half forgotten shed, its roofline uneven but intact. "There," Price said simply. They pulled up beside the building. The windows were boarded, the paint weather bleached to a color between gray and nothing. A single padlock hung on the door, and Michael almost laughed until he remembered Carson's words. He knelt, reached under the corner brick by the stoop, and felt cold metal against his fingers. A key. Inside, the air smelled of dust and close time. The building was one long room divided by a row of shelves. Cardboard boxes sat like abandoned chess pieces, each one labeled with codes no one had cared about in decades. Michael found the safe in the corner, waist-high, steel, chipped paint at the edges. Price stepped forward, the key turning smooth, the door swinging open with a groan. For the first time since they'd taken the box, Michiel felt a moment's release. They lifted it out of the trunk and slid it inside, covering it with an old ledger before shutting the safe and turning the lock. The weight left his arms and then, slowly, his chest. Price stood back. "Not gone. Just not in our pockets tonight." Michael nodded. They laid out their few belongings on a small table near the window. A lantern from the car gave them light. The silence was thick but not oppressive, this was the kind of quiet you earned. They ate from a bag of food picked up in Denver. Sandwiches, bottled water, apples. It was the first time in days the act of eating didn't feel like a calculation. When night came, Michael unrolled his sleeping bag on the floor while Price took the cot in the corner. But before sleep, Price gestured to the table. "We take stock. Not of what's in the box, we leave that sealed. But of what we already know." They spread the copies Carson had made, the notebook Whitaker had given, the sketches that still unsettled Michael when he saw how close they came to real places. Piece by piece, they built a map of a shadow. Aurora's funding trail. Sub-projects branching like roots under the soil. And at the center, a word that kept appearing in different hands, different ink, and different years, Echo Point. Michael circled it with his pen. If this isn't just a code, if it's a site, then it's still alive. Somebody's feeding it. Price nodded. And if it's alive, someone wants it invisible. Which means when we touch it, they'll feel the tremor. The lantern flickered. For a moment Michael imagined the shelves listening, the boxes leaning in. He pushed the thought aside and focused on the papers. In Whitaker's notes, a line caught his eye: field trials, subject relocation successful, transfer to EP confirmed. He tapped the line. Transfer to EP. Price adjusted his glasses, leaned closer. Not just paper, then. Not just funding. Living subjects. And moved. Michael looked up. The air in the room suddenly felt colder. Relocation means they were kept. Which means records. If we find Echo Point, we don't just find a site. We find people who were erased. Neither of them spoke for a while. The truth carried its own volume. Later, when Price slept, Michael walked the perimeter of the building with the tag reader Carson had given them. No chirps. No magnets. Just the wind moving through dry weeds. He returned inside, checked the safe one last time, then lay down on the floor. The boards beneath him creaked like slow breathing. In the dark, he thought about Whitaker's face when he had spoken about what he had seen, something between guilt and exhaustion, like a man who'd carried too much weight too far. Michael wondered if the people relocated to EP had looked the same way. He wondered if any of them were still alive. He slept lightly, waking at each small sound, but nothing came. No headlights across the lot. No knock at the door. Only the rhythm of the night holding steady. By dawn, he rose to find Price already awake, the papers neatly stacked again. Price looked toward the safe. One night's relief. Now we carry the weight again. Michael unlocked the safe, retrieved the box, and set it on the table. For a moment they both just looked at it, as if waiting for it to decide whether to open itself. Then Michael packed it back into the trunk. The lid shut with a final metallic click. Price folded Carson's map. Next step. Echo Point. Michael started the car. The building shrank in the mirror. Ahead, the road turned west into hills that grew sharper with every mile. The safe stop had bought them a breath. Now came the next plunge. By mid-morning the land had opened wide, flat valleys rolling out beneath a sky that seemed too large to be real. The highway ran straight, a gray vein against the red dust. Michael drove with steady hands, the box once more in the trunk, its weight turning every mile into a negotiation between hope and fear. Price unfolded a thin strip of paper from Whitaker's notebook. The ink was faded, but the coordinates were clear, a string of numbers pointing farther west. If EP is real, he said, it will be somewhere they don't expect people to wander. Michael scanned the empty horizon. Seems like everywhere out here qualifies. They followed the road into the desert. Signs grew fewer, towns smaller. The gas stations looked like relics of another decade, their pumps leaning, their paint flaking. Each time they stopped, Michael felt eyes on him. Not many, just enough to remind him that strangers always stood out in places where nothing new ever happened. By late afternoon, a narrow turnoff appeared. The sign was blank, its posts rusted. The road itself was cracked but drivable, leading into low hills. Michael slowed. Price nodded once. This is it. The track bent and bent again until it looked more like a path than a road. And then, ahead, it stopped being either. A barricade stretched across the asphalt, 2 concrete blocks, a pole with a chain between them. A small prefabricated hut stood nearby, painted beige, with a single antenna rising crookedly from its roof. Michael pulled the car to a crawl. Not on any map, he said. Which is exactly the point, Price replied. 2 men emerged from the hut. They weren't dressed like soldiers, but they weren't civilians either. Boots, plain jackets, caps with no insignia. Each carried the weight of men who were used to standing still for long hours, waiting for something to come to them. One raised his hand, signaling Michael to stop. Michael parked. His heart ticked faster, though his face stayed still. Now what? Price's voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. Now we see whose road this is. The man who had signaled approached the driver's side. He leaned down, eyes hidden under the brim of his cap. Road closed, he said. Turn around. Michael glanced at Price. Price leaned slightly forward. Road closed to who? The man didn't answer. He only repeated, turn around. Behind him, the second man stood at ease, but his gaze flicked once to the trunk. Michael felt it like static across his skin. Price spoke again, his tone mild but edged. We're looking for Echo Point. Maybe you've heard of it. The man's jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, his stillness carried too much meaning. Then he straightened, slapped the roof of the car twice with a flat palm, and stepped back. Turn around, he said again. Michael put the car in reverse. Slowly, carefully, he backed them onto the dirt shoulder, turned, and eased away. The men watched until the road curved them out of sight. Only then did Michael speak. They knew. Price's hands were folded tight in his lap. Yes. They let us go. For now, Price said. His voice carried no relief, only calculation. Which means we were closer than they wanted us to be. Michael drove on in silence, his mind replaying the way the man's eyes had lingered on the trunk. It hadn't been curiosity. It had been recognition. They pulled into a wide gravel turnout a mile away and stopped. The desert lay flat around them, empty except for brush and rock. Price unfolded the map again, tracing with his finger. That checkpoint wasn't guarding nothing, he said. It was guarding exactly what we're after. Echo Point is past that line. Michael leaned on the wheel, his forehead brushing the leather. So how do we get past them? Price studied the map, then the land around them. We don't go through. We go around. These places always have side veins, maintenance roads, supply trails, paths too small to draw suspicion but big enough for a truck to use. Michael exhaled, long and low. And we find one before they decide to come looking. The sun was beginning to lower, painting the hills in long shadows. They drove again, following rough lines, scanning for tracks in the dirt. Michael's eyes caught a thin path veering off near a dry wash. He slowed. "There," he said. Price leaned forward, peered out the window. The path was narrow, rutted, but real. He gave a single nod. "That's our way in." They turned off, the car rocking as it left the pavement. Dust rose in a long plume behind them, marking their path like a signature. Michael gripped the wheel, feeling every stone through the tires. The path climbed into the hills. Around one bend, they stopped and killed the engine. From the ridge above, they could see the road they had been turned away from. The hut. The barricade. The two men still standing there, smaller now, but still watching. Price lifted his binoculars. "Notice the antenna," he said. "That's not for show. They're connected. Someone else knows we're here." Michael's pulse thudded in his ears. He looked at the horizon, where the desert stretched into a haze of heat and distance. Somewhere out there was Echo Point. Somewhere out there, beyond the barricade, was the truth that had already cost too many people too much. He started the engine again. The car climbed higher, into the hills, where the road was no longer a road but a trail. Dust coated the windshield. The light grew redder, sharper, until it felt like they were driving into the mouth of something. Price folded the map with steady hands. "The closer we get," he said, "the louder the silence will become." Michael nodded. He pressed the gas. The car moved forward, away from the checkpoint, into the narrowing paths of the high desert. The box in the trunk shifted with the motion, as if reminding them both that they weren't done yet. Not by far. The dirt path narrowed until it was hardly more than a pair of ruts winding into the hills. Michael kept the car crawling, every dip and bump rattling the frame. Dust trailed behind them like smoke, then fell back into the land. They climbed until the basin below was a smear of pale light and the checkpoint looked like a toy set on the desert floor. From up here, the horizon rolled in waves, broken only by rock outcrops and scrub. The road ended at a flat shelf tucked between two ridges. Michael pulled in and killed the engine. The silence pressed in immediately, broken only by the faint crack of cooling metal. Price got out first, scanning the ridge lines with the calm precision of a man who had been hunted before. He walked a slow circle, boots crunching on dry earth, then returned to the car. "We'll stay here tonight," he said. "From this perch, we see without being seen." Michael stretched, his back stiff from the drive. "And if they're watching the hills too?" Price set his bag down. "Then we learn how close they want us." They unloaded with care, lantern, notebooks, the passive tag reader, a coil of rope. The box stayed in the trunk. It was safer under steel than beside their sleep. Michael lit the lantern low, the glow barely touching the rocks around them. They sat at a small rise overlooking the basin. In the distance, the checkpoint lights glowed faint yellow, like embers refusing to die. Michael lifted the binoculars. Beyond the barricade, faint tire tracks cut into the dust. And farther still, half buried in the basin wall, the long low structure waited, its roofline blending into earth, its antenna now steady against the night sky. "Echo Point," Michael whispered. Price leaned on his knees. "Or one of its doors." They stayed quiet, taking turns with the binoculars. Hours passed. The desert cooled. Coyotes called somewhere far off, their voices carrying thin through the still air. Michael rubbed his eyes. "Feels like waiting for a storm you can see but can't feel yet." Price's voice was soft. "That's because it's already circling." As if to answer him, a faint light appeared on the ridge opposite theirs. Not bright, just a dull red glow, the kind of ember you might mistake for a cigarette if you didn't know better. Michael froze. He passed the binoculars. Price adjusted the focus. His face didn't move, but his shoulders tightened. Not reflection. Lens. Michael's chest went cold. They're watching. Yes, Price said. But not just us. Whoever holds that hill is looking at Echo Point too. They killed the lantern. Darkness wrapped them whole. The basin below seemed even larger, more hollow. Michael felt the earth beneath him tilt, as if they were balanced on a seesaw with an unseen weight at the other end. They didn't speak for long minutes. Finally Michael whispered, "So it's not only us out here." Price nodded. "Which means there are others who want what we want, or to stop us from wanting it." The night thickened. Michael lay on his back, staring at the sky crowded with stars. He tried to imagine the people on the opposite ridge, government shadows, corporate mercenaries, or some third hand reaching for the same hidden lever. None of the choices sat easy. At dawn, the glow was gone. Only rock and scrub remained where the ember had burned. Michael felt the memory of it in his bones, like the ache of an old scar. They brewed weak coffee on a small burner, the steam barely visible. Price studied his notes. "We can't wait forever. Tonight we use the arroyo." Michael looked toward the Beasin. In the light of morning, the long low structure seemed even stranger. From this angle, he could see how the earth had been cut, then filled, the lines too sharp for nature. The roof was flat, but vents rose at intervals, spaced like teeth. "If it's that big," he said, "it wasn't built for storage." Price's reply was quiet but firm. "It was built for keeping." They packed up before the sun climbed high, leaving no trace. The car stayed under brush, hidden. They hiked east until they found the arroyo, dry, deep, its walls sheer enough to keep them hidden if they kept low. The path snaked toward the basin, a line carved by floods long forgotten. Michael crouched, running his hand over the packed earth. "Backstage," he said again, repeating Price's word from yesterday. "Curtain tonight," Price answered. They returned to their perch to wait. The day dragged. Heat shimmered off stone. Time thickened like syrup. Michael wrote in his notebook, sketching the basin again, marking the ridges, the checkpoint, the arroyo's line. At the top of the page he wrote a single question: who else is in the dark? That night, when the stars returned, so did the ember. This time it was closer. Night came down fast in the desert. One moment the ridges still burned faint orange, the next they were shadows against a navy sky. Michael and Price left the car hidden under scrub and moved on foot, each step careful, each sound swallowed by the arroyo. The dry channel cut a path toward the basin, its walls climbing high enough to keep them hidden. Michael's pack was light: binoculars, notebook, Carson's reader, a coil of rope. Price carried only what he trusted most: a small lantern, his notes, and a sidearm wrapped in cloth. They spoke little, letting the crunch of gravel under their boots mark the rhythm of their progress. Above them, the stars stretched like an ocean. Michael felt small, but not invisible. Somewhere on the opposite ridge, the watchers with the red glow might still be sitting, lenses pointed into the night. He wondered if those same eyes would notice two men slipping through the earth's scar. The arroyo curved, then flattened, then curved again. Each bend brought them closer. By Michael's count, they had covered nearly 2 miles when Price raised his hand and stopped. Ahead, the arroyo narrowed, and its lip rose toward the basin floor. Michael crouched. In the sand, faint lines crossed the arroyo like scars, metal rods, thin and evenly spaced, buried shallow but not hidden. "Sensors," Price whispered. Michael nodded. He pulled the reader from his pack and pressed the button. It stayed silent for 3 beats, then chirped once, sharp, clinical. He held it closer to the sand. Another chirp. "Grid," he said softly. "Probably pressure, maybe RF." Price's eyes moved to the ridge above them. "Designed for cattle, explained as wildlife, used for men." Michael scanned the edges. A wash of rock jutted across the arroyo, forming a small natural bridge. Narrow, but passable. He pointed. "There." They crawled across one at a time, careful not to send a single pebble onto the lines below. Michael's palm stung from the rock, but they made it across. On the other side, the arroyo widened again, carrying them nearer the fence. The basin opened in front of them like a stage. The long low structure cut into the earth was darker than the night around it, its flat roof broken only by vents and a thin line of light bleeding from one seam. The smaller building by the fence glowed faint yellow, its antenna blinking red. Michael crouched, breathing shallow. It's alive. Price's whisper was steady. And it's watching. They reached the fence where the arroyo ended. The posts loomed above them, each topped with the dark square housings Michael had seen through the binoculars. He reached up, touched the chain link lightly. Cold. Price pointed to a section where the fence sagged into the arroyo wall, half collapsed by erosion. Weak point. Michael tested it. The wire bowed but held. He looped the rope through and pulled until a gap opened, just enough for them to slide under. The sensors above stayed dark. No alarms. Inside the fence, the air felt different, thicker, electric, as if they had crossed from open desert into something owned. The ground bore faint tire tracks. Ahead, the long structure loomed larger, the line of light now clearly a door seam. They moved low, sticking to the shadow of the wall. The vents rose like chimneys, each one humming faintly. Michael pressed his ear to the steel. A vibration ran through it, subtle but constant, the pulse of machines still running below ground. Price crouched beside him. They never shut it down. Michael's throat felt dry. So Echo Point isn't history. It's present tense. They crept toward the corner where the wall met the earth. A service hatch sat flush against the surface, padlocked but old. Michael brushed dirt from the handle. No guard, no camera. Just steel and silence. Behind them, a faint sound drifted, the crunch of tires on gravel. They froze. A vehicle was moving along the inner perimeter. Its headlights swept the fence, then turned, tracing a patrol line. Michael and Price pressed flat against the wall, the hum of the vents masking their breathing. The truck passed, slow, deliberate, then disappeared around the far corner. Michael exhaled. They're patrolling. Price's eyes glinted in the dark. Which means they're guarding something that breathes. They didn't force the hatch that night. It would have been suicide without knowing the rhythm of the patrols. Instead, they retreated to the shadow of a vent, noting the timing, the distance, the blind spots. Michael scribbled in his notebook, the words quick and cramped: patrol, 15 minutes. Hatch, unsecured. The night stretched thin. Twice more the patrol truck circled. Twice more they flattened themselves against steel. Each time, Michael felt the line between caution and capture narrow. By the time the sky paled at the edges, they slipped back through the fence, under the rope gap, and into the arroyo. The walk back was longer, heavier, the weight of knowledge pressing harder than the box ever had. When they reached the car, hidden beneath scrub, Michael sank into the driver's seat. Price closed the door softly, then said the words that made the morning sharper than the dawn itself. Echo Point isn't a memory. It's a machine still running. And whatever it's running on, it's not done yet. Michael looked west, toward the basin, toward the long low structure waiting like a secret half buried in the earth. His hand tightened on the wheel. Then tonight, we open the hatch. The hatch was nothing more than a rectangle of rusting steel pressed into the earth, a padlock dangling like an afterthought. Michael crouched before it, the desert chill biting through his jacket. He brushed dust from the lock with his thumb. Old, corroded, the kind of thing a strong twist might break. Price knelt beside him, lantern low. His face was calm, but his eyes gleamed with the weight of decision. Once we open this, he said softly, there's no closing it again. Michael slipped a pry bar from his pack. The metal groaned once, then snapped clean. The lock fell into the dirt. The sound seemed to echo through the basin, too loud for comfort. Both men froze, listening for patrols. Nothing. Michael tugged the hatch handle. It resisted, then gave way with a long screech, releasing a breath of stale, chemical air. A ladder descended into darkness. They exchanged a glance. Price gestured. I'll follow. You first. Michael clipped the lantern to his belt and started down. The steel rungs were cold, his palms slick with sweat. 10 feet. 20. Then boots touched concrete. The air smelled of dust and something sharper, like old ozone. Price descended after him, landing with a thud. They stood in a narrow corridor lined with peeling paint. Rust streaked the walls. Ahead, the tunnel stretched into blackness, the floor sloping downward. Michael raised the lantern. It's not abandoned. The light revealed fresh footprints in the dust. Not many, but recent. Price's jaw tightened. Someone still walks these halls. They moved forward, footsteps muffled by grime. The tunnel bent, then opened into a chamber. The ceiling arched high, pipes running overhead, humming faintly. Along one wall stood a row of consoles, old, but not dead. Faint lights blinked on their panels, steady as heartbeats. Michael felt his pulse climb. It's powered. Price brushed his hand across a console. The dust was thin, disturbed. Not just powered. Used. They explored deeper. The next room was larger, its floor lined with metal grates. Through the gaps, a faint vibration rose, a living thrum. Michael crouched, pressing his hand to the grate. Heat pulsed below. This is no archive, he whispered. Price's reply was grim. It's an engine. They moved carefully, checking each corner. At the far end of the chamber stood a glass booth, its interior lit by a pale green glow. Inside sat a single chair, straps dangling from its arms. Wires trailed from the ceiling, feeding into a box mounted on the wall. The smell of ozone was stronger here. Michael stared, throat tight. Control chamber. Price stepped closer, studying the straps, the crude electrodes. Not control. Conduit. Michael shook his head. You think they brought subjects here? For experiments? Price's silence was answer enough. They turned as a faint sound carried down the hall, a metallic clang, followed by soft footsteps. Not theirs. Michael killed the lantern. Darkness swallowed them. The footsteps grew clearer, measured, unhurried. A beam of white light cut through the hall, swinging side to side. A guard? A caretaker? Whoever it was, they weren't surprised to be here. Price leaned close, his breath warm in Michael's ear. Decision now. Watch or retreat. Michael's fingers curled tight around his notebook. For years he had chased paper, fragments, half-truths. Now the truth walked in flesh and light. He whispered, "We watch." They pressed flat against the wall. The beam approached, then entered the chamber. A figure stepped into view, a man in fatigues, middle-aged, his face gaunt, his movements practiced. He checked the consoles, tapped a dial, scribbled notes on a clipboard. His expression was blank, as if routine dulled all thought. Michael's pulse pounded. The man paused, then walked into the glass booth. He adjusted the straps on the chair, wiped a cloth across the armrests, and left again. He never looked around, never hesitated. When his footsteps faded, Michael let out a shuddering breath. It's active. They're still running it. Price's face was shadow, but his voice carried iron. Echo Point didn't die. It went underground. Literally. They stayed hidden until the hum of the facility seemed to sync with their own heartbeat. Finally, they slipped back into the corridor, retracing their steps to the ladder. At the hatch, Michael paused, staring up at the square of night above. The stars looked impossibly far, as if the earth itself wanted to hold them here. Not yet, he said quietly. We can't walk away now. Price gripped the ladder. We won't. But we'll need more than eyes. We'll need proof that bleeds daylight. They climbed back into the desert, sealing the hatch behind them. The basin was silent, the patrol distant. But in Michael's notebook, the words already burned, Echo Point lives. They waited until the shift of air in the corridor felt empty again. No footsteps, no flashlight beam threading the dark. Then Michael and Price eased the hatch up once more, slipped back down the ladder, and sealed the night behind them like a lid. The stale cool closed over their faces. The hum rose from the floor again, patient, tireless. This time they moved with a different purpose. No more proving it was alive. Now they needed the why. Past the glass booth, beyond the grating that carried warm air from deeper levels, a side corridor branched off into a low-ceilinged room lined with metal shelves. Boxes sat in perfect rows, labels typed on old paper strips and glued crooked, ops logs, cal schedules, intake, med, viewer notes. Michael's breath fogged a little in the colder air. He ran a finger along a spine and came away with gray dust. Price clicked the lantern lower and touched a box marked Eclipse, Field Sessions, Audio. He lifted the lid. Inside, in tidy stacks, lay reel-to-reel tapes in cardboard sleeves, each sleeve bluntly stamped with a date and a string of letters, EP/FR11, EP/FR12, EP/FR27. No seals, no warnings. Just the confidence of a place no one thought would be found. Take photos first, Price whispered. Michael snapped quick, steady frames, box, labels, dates. He slid one tape free. The paper sleeve creaked softly. On the cardboard, a penciled note, conduit stable at 1942, secondary voice present. Michael felt the words land like a weight on a thin shelf inside him. They found an old machine on a side table, dusty but plugged in, a reel-to-reel player with a cracked plastic window. Price tested the power. A red light glowed, dull as an ember. He looked at Michael and raised an eyebrow as if to say, "Your call." Michael threaded the reel with careful hands, the way he'd learned from a grandfather who kept radio dramas in boxes in a garage. The tape caught, rolled, the player clicked into motion with a gentle whir. For a few seconds, only room tone. A faint hiss like wind in a mouth. Then a man's voice, flat, patient, trained to carry authority without shouting. Session 27. Field Regimen. Eclipse protocol. Conduit present. Monitor present. Another voice followed, thinner, higher. Strained. Ready. Michael's spine tightened. He glanced at Price, who did not move. Fix on the coordinate, the first voice said. Describe the structure at the center. A silence stretched, a breath, then the thin voice returned, changed, low, as if the speaker were staring downhill into himself. Slab. Earth pushed back. Vents like teeth. A door seam with light. Michael's hand tightened on the edge of the table. The description could have been the room they stood in now, or a twin of it somewhere else. Proceed, the first voice said. Observe interior. The thin voice faltered, then steadied. Chamber. Grates. Pressure low. Smell sharp. Chair in a glass booth, straps, wires. Price and Michael didn't look at the booth behind them. They didn't need to. Secondary presence? The first voice asked. A long pause. When the answer came, the thin voice sounded farther away. Yes. Like a room next to a room. Not visible. But touching. Moves when I move. Engage. A soft sigh on the tape, paper rustling, the thud of a hand on a table. Then, quietly, it is here. Price leaned closer to the player, as if he could smell the air where the voice had once spoken. Michael raised the camera and shot the counter, the glowing red light, the reel turning like a watch face no one had noticed for years. The first voice resumed. Mark test with auditory cue. A tone followed, a short bell, clinical, designed to leave a mark in the head. After the tone, the thin voice changed again. Not deranged, simply, doubled. As if two people were speaking out of a single throat and taking turns sharing the same breath. Target has motion at the periphery, it said. Heat signatures, 3, now 2, now. The reel clicked. Silence. Then a different man, brisk, the kind that arrived when things were no longer going the way the paperwork described. Subject 12 shows crossbleed. Reduce intensity by half. Let the channel rest. A final note, scratching pen on paper, then the tape hissed and ended in a thin tail. Michael stopped the machine. The quiet that followed felt too large for the room. He did not look at Price yet. He rewound, slipped the tape into its sleeve, put it back in the box exactly where it had sat. Only then did Price speak, the words low and steady. They weren't just looking outward, he said. They were trying to let something look back through them. Conduit, Michael said, feeling the word settle in a place he didn't want it. They moved along the shelf. Viewer notes held thin binders, each with a simple tag, 15, 16, 17, 12. Michael pulled 17, the number that had followed them since the first day in the archive. Inside, typed pages with time stamps, short descriptions, notations in the margin by different hands. One note in pencil, unstable when exposed to auditory cue, recommends paired sessions with stabilizer. Another, in blue ink, relocation approved. A paper-clipped photo fell out, blurred, a shoulder and a jawline, the angle wrong, as if the photographer hadn't been allowed to take the picture and tried anyway. On the back, a date 2 months before 1979 tipped over into 1980. Underneath, a single word, transfer. Michael slid the photo back into the binder. He found 12 and opened it. Handwritten pages, smaller, crammed lines. The same hand as the note on the reel sleeve. Not a doctor's voice, not a commander's. The words moved with a certain sadness, sleep only after sessions, complaints of echoing footsteps, claims to hear other room even in daylight. A later entry read, secondary voice answered to auditory cue without prompt. He closed the binder gently. On the far shelf, ops logs. Price picked one at random. Inside were charts, room temperatures, line voltages, cycles, times of night. Beside a column labeled field link, a series of numbers rose and fell like a heart rate. Twice the line was drawn hard to the top and marked with a small star. Beside the stars, a word, contact. Price didn't comment. He turned the page. Another set of stars. Another contact. That's their word for it, Michael said, in a voice that hoped it was wrong. Price nodded. Not a metaphor. A measurement. A faint scrape came from the corridor. They both went still. Not footsteps. Something gentler. A door shifting as pressure changed. Somewhere in the facility, air moved from one chamber to another. The machine breathed. 2 minutes, Price said. Michael understood, that was their safety margin. He shot what he could: spines, labels, the player, a close-up of the penciled note, the stars beside contact. He slid 17 and 12 back where they had been, squared the boxes, rolled the lid on audio. On a lower shelf, half hidden by a black binder, a slim folder sat skewed. He pulled it free. Inside, thin onion-skin copies of a manual with a friendly title, Operator's Guide, Field Sessions. The pages were practical, not mystical: how to time an auditory cue, how long to wait before asking for a description, when to stop for rest. On one page, a flow chart showed 2 boxes labeled conduit and monitor, arrows between them, a bell icon at the top. In the margin, someone had written, when monitor fatigues, conduit carries both. Michael felt the hair rise on his arms. He slipped the guide back into the folder and tucked it behind the binder where he had found it. He didn't take anything. He didn't want the room to know it had been touched. Price pointed to a final box labeled Cal Schedules. Inside, schedules of sessions across months, with initials for staff and a column for exposure duration. Near the bottom of one page, a line had been struck through with a single pen stroke. In the margin, a note: viewer removed, medical, long term. No number, no name. They stood there for one more breath. Then the decision arrived between them without needing to be said. They had enough to show the shape of the thing. Proof would get them through the first door of daylight. More than that would be greed. They killed the player, lowered the lantern, and retraced their steps toward the hatch. In the console chamber, the glass booth glowed faintly again. The straps lay quiet. A tone sounded somewhere, not loud, but the same precise bell they had heard on the tape, as if the building were reminding itself how to count to 1. Michael felt the sound in his teeth. He and Price didn't run. Men running make noise. They moved clean, slid the hatch open, climbed into night, and sealed the lid with the same slow pressure they had used before. The stars blinked. The basin lay flat and patient. At the car, they sat in the dark for a long minute, hands on their knees, breath leveling. What was it for? Michael asked finally, looking at the silent ridge where watchers sometimes glowed red. Price's answer belonged to someone older than either of them. To find a way to press a thumb on the scale without putting a hand in the frame. Michael watched the line of the hills, the long low roof hidden in the earth. He could still hear the bell. He knew he would hear it in the quiet places of his head for a while. He turned the key. The engine caught softly. They let the sound settle into the night, then rolled away without headlights for the first 50 yards. The road found them anyway. Behind them, the hatch lay flat. Under it, the reel cooled. Somewhere, in a room they hadn't reached, a page turned over on a clipboard and a man who carried out routines he didn't write drew a small star next to a number and wrote contact in neat letters. The machine kept breathing. They drove without headlights for a while, letting the desert hold them, the tires whispering over gravel like someone clearing their throat in the next room. When they finally eased the beams on, the basin was already a soft absence behind them and the ridge rose like a low black wave ahead. Michael kept his hands light on the wheel, the way you do when you don't want the road to know you're there. Price didn't speak. He watched the mirror, then the side window, then the map folded to a square no bigger than a wallet. He was counting something, seconds between patrol passes, minutes since the last tone in the chamber, breaths since the hatch shut. Habits keep men alive. Michael let him count. At the shelf where they'd camped 2 nights earlier, they rolled the car under scrub until its shape became more bush than steel. The wind had picked up, carrying grit that tasted like metal. Michael killed the engine and sat with his palms flat on his thighs, letting the humming in his bones step down from the pitch the facility had tuned him to. "Say it," Price whispered. Michael looked out at the emptiness that felt crowded. "We have it. The tapes, the logs, the binders. It's a machine. Still running. Conduits. Monitors. Contact measured, not imagined. Price nodded once. An echo point is not a rumor. It's a room with lights that work. They didn't light the lantern. They talked in the dark, choosing the next thread with care. Denver had bought them a duplicate and a place to run if they were cut. But they still carried the original gravity, the box, the notebook photos, the smell of ozone that seemed to cling to Michael's jacket even in the night air. They couldn't go back to Carson until they knew how many eyes were on the road between. A faint ember winked alive on the opposite ridge. Michael saw it first. He didn't point. He only breathed in, then out. Price said, "Left shoulder of the south ridge." "Closer than before," Michael answered. The ember didn't move the way a cigarette does. It held steady, then dimmed, then flared, as if glass were catching and losing the smallest light. Lens, not flame. The watchers were back. And if they were patient enough to stay through 2 nights of nothing, they were patient enough to wait for a door to open. Michael slid out of the car. The air was cooler here than below. He listened. The desert is never silent, it's only layered. Wind, grit, the far call of night birds. Beneath it, a new line, a soft mechanical hum moving the way men move, stop, turn, adjust. He crouched. From the east, somewhere beyond the slope of the arroyo they'd used, a low engine approached, lights off. He tapped the roof twice, Price's signal for, stay low. They belly crawled to the lip of rock that gave them a narrow view into the fold of land. In the dim, a shape slid along the arroyo's far side, a side-by-side utility vehicle, doors caged, 2 silhouettes inside. It stopped where a runoff cut became a ramp, the way water builds a perfect path by accident and men come back later to pretend they designed it. The passenger climbed out. A soft click, a rod extended, a panel opened on the side of the vehicle. The man bent, did something Michael couldn't see, then stood and swept the arroyo with a flashlight fitted with a hood to keep the beam narrow. The light didn't climb the walls. It traced the floor, hunting for what feet leave behind. Michael felt the memory of last night's crossing in his knees and palms. They had brushed rocks where they could and crawled across the natural bridge where they couldn't. If the sensor grid had recorded weight, the log would show it. If it had recorded heat, the range would still be warm. Either way, the arroyo had a bruise now. You don't have to see a bruise in daylight to know it hurts at night. Price's breath was steady in the dark. "This is the first open move," he said. "Not guarding the lid. Tasting the edge." The flashlight hit a place where the sand was smoother than nature likes it. The beam paused. The man knelt, touched the ground with 2 gloved fingers, lifted a pinch of dust to the light, watched it fall. He turned to the driver and raised a hand, 3 fingers. Not sure. Not proof. But attention. Michael's ribs felt tight. He pictured the patrol truck and the long low roof and the green glow inside the booth. He pictured the bell tone and the word contact starred on the logs. The facility didn't only watch its room. It watched the approach to the room. If it had a threshold, the arroyo was part of it. The utility vehicle idled with its engine so low it was mostly vibration. The passenger took something else from the panel, a short one like Carson's reader but bulkier, wrapped in matte. He moved it in a slow grid over the sand. A response light flicked on, flicked off, flicked on again. He looked up toward the ridge as if asking the night a question. "Time to move," Price whispered. Michael didn't argue. There's a moment when gathering more detail is greed and the only discipline left is backward. They slid back from the lip, staying below the line of sky. At the car, Price pulled the tag reader from the glove box and walked it around the wheel wells from habit, once, twice, getting only the night back as answer. He opened the trunk and touched the lid of the box as if checking a sleeping child's forehead for heat. "Denver?" Michael asked. "Not yet," Price said. "They'll be watching the obvious roads by morning. We go north first, then loop west, a county alphabet of not-quite roads." They rolled the car out by hand the first 20 feet to keep gravel from talking for them. When the engine turned, Price kept the revs shallow, the way you say thank you to a machine when you need it to be quiet and strong at the same time. As they crested the shelf, the ember on the opposite ridge brightened a fraction, then went dark. Not an accident. A signal. Not to them, but to someone else below. Michael drove with his shoulders loose and his mind tight. He worked through the map of the land he'd been building behind his eyes, the checkpoint and its tidy smile, the basin and its fence line with small dark caps, the arroyo like a vein, the long low roof and the glass booth where sound taught men to answer in two voices, the shelves with boxes that never expected hands. The machine ran on more than electricity. It ran on people agreeing not to look. They reached the gravel turnout where they'd paused the first day and kept going. "A mile farther," Price said, "turn right here." No sign. No road. Just a line of dirt that understood it had a job. They rode the line for 20 minutes, then found a dip where a cattle gate lay open. The land beyond sloped gently into a shallow bowl. Price checked the mirror again and finally spoke in a normal voice. "We'll park here. We sleep a little. We leave at first light." "We're leaving Echo behind?" Michael asked. "We're taking it with us," Price said. "The part we can carry right now is proof. The part we can't will be there when we come back with help." Michael killed the engine. The sudden quiet made the last hour loud inside his head. He stretched the map across the wheel, tapped the brown grid where Carson had marked the safe storage. "We still have the duplicate with Carson." Price nodded. "And now we have the shape of the confession. Tapes, logs, schedules, flow charts. Even if all of this gets taken from us, the story has edges. I can walk it blind for a while." They sat with the windows cracked, the smell of sage and dust moving softly through. Far off, a coyote tested 3 notes and decided to keep them. Michael closed his eyes and saw the reel turning, heard the bell, felt the room listening back. Sleep came in a thin, jagged line, not enough to rest, enough to blunt the sharpest fears. Just before dawn, a sound woke him that didn't belong, a small thud against the car's rear quarter panel. Not metal on metal. Cotton on steel. He tensed, hand on Price's shoulder before he was fully awake. Price didn't startle. He opened his eyes and put a finger to his lips. Slowly, he reached for the door, cracked it, slid out, and crouched. Michael followed, keeping the car between him and the rise of the land. The sky was still a deep blue without edges. At the rear wheel well, a cloth pouch lay in the dust. No footprints in the immediate light, only the idea of them in the dark beyond the car. Price picked up the pouch between thumb and forefinger and loosened the drawstring. Inside, a small steel tag with a magnet, matte black, and a single folded note. He opened the note. For words, printed in plain block letters. "You are not alone." Price's face didn't change. He folded the note once and handed it to Michael, then tipped the pouch to show the tag. Same size as the one they'd peeled from their own wheel. Same anonymous face. "Gift?" Michael said, quiet, trying to be a joke and failing. "Message," Price answered. "Someone else is walking the same road. And they want us to know they can reach the car without us hearing them." "They the Watchers?" Michael asked. "Or someone the Watchers watch," Price said. "Either way, the next move will not be polite." A line of gray split the east, and the hills took on edges again. Price dropped the tag back into the pouch and tied it shut. He placed it under the car tire, then rolled the car forward just enough to flatten it. The pouch gave with a soft crack, the magnet thunked to steel and died there. "Now it's our message," Price said. "We read yours. We don't keep it." They merged onto a county road that wasn't on their map and let it carry them toward a place with a name and coffee. The box rode silent. The duplicate waited in Denver. Echo Point spun below ground, writing its quiet lines across paper, across men. Michael looked at the folded note again and tucked it under the map's corner. He wasn't sure if the words were warning or invitation. He only knew they were true. They were not alone. They reached town just after 9, the kind of place where the streets meet at right angles and the stoplights are more suggestion than law. A grain elevator stood like a white spine at the edge of things. 2 diners faced opposite corners of Main Street as if they'd been arguing for decades about whose coffee saved more marriages. Michael parked beneath the partial shade of a cottonwood. The engine ticked as it cooled. Price rolled his shoulders and studied the storefront glass as if it were water, as if ripples might tell him which way to lean. Plan stays simple, he said. Fuel, food, a bathroom with a door that locks. You buy nothing that can be traced. Cash only. 10 minutes. Michael nodded. Then North Loop. And later, Carson. Later, Price said, because a promise only has weight if you don't spend it too early. They crossed to the nearer diner. Inside, a bell on the door announced them with the cheerfulness most bells use to disguise their age. A woman behind the counter poured coffee as if that were the only job God actually cared about. A few men in seed caps glanced over, marked strangers, returned to their plates. Michael took the corner booth with his back to the wall. Price sat facing the windows. Small habits build big margins. The waitress set 2 mugs on the table and slid sugar like a deck of cards. Michael ordered eggs and toast because eggs and toast look like you belong anywhere. Price asked for oatmeal because it's what men order when they need to keep their hands from shaking. Bathroom? Michael asked. Back, past the pie case, she said. He went, moving steady, not hurried. In the mirror, his face could have belonged to a dozen other men, road-tired, shaven, not yet past the point where a nap would fail. He washed his hands longer than he needed to, listening to the hum of the fan and the distant clatter of plates. On the way back, he paused at the pie case just long enough to look like a person thinking about dessert at the wrong time of day. When he slid into the booth again, he said, 2 men outside. Not together, but together. Price didn't turn. Describe. Both plain jackets. One by the pharmacy window, pretending to read posted hours. One by the truck with the ladder rack. Neither looks at the other. Eyes? Cold, but bored. The hired kind of bored. Price sipped coffee. Daylight makes brave men careful. Their plates arrived. Forks moved. They ate like people who knew they might not later. Between bites, Price leaned in a fraction. We assume the pouch was an honest message, someone else is out here. But we also assume the watchers have more than one set of eyes. Today is the first attempt to write us in daylight. Intercept, Michael said. Polite at first, Price replied. Polite is how they test whether you scare easy. He slid a folded bill under the mug, nodded thanks to the waitress, and stood. Michael followed, the bell on the door announcing them again. Outside, sunlight made the edges of things too sharp to be trusted. The 2 men stood where Michael had left them, no huddle, no hand signals, just presence. Price crossed toward the pharmacy as if he were the kind of older man who asks clerks about insurance formularies. The man by the window straightened, then relaxed, then straightened again. Michael angled toward the car. The intercept came from the street, not the sidewalk, a dark sedan that rolled past too slow, then pulled to the curb ahead of their bumper. The driver stayed put. The passenger stepped out, short hair, clean shoes, expression like a man about to sell you a warranty you didn't know was already expired. He raised a hand just high enough to be friendly. Mr. Harris? He asked, as if he didn't already know. Michael stopped what he was doing exactly, turning the key in midair, halfway to unlocking the door. He let the key hang, then lowered it. You are? Dixon, the man said, which meant his name could be anything. He smiled without showing teeth. Quick word. Price had moved within earshot. Michael didn't look back at him. He looked at the street, at the shadow the elevator threw, at the faces behind the diner glass pretending not to watch. Make it quick, Michael said. Good, Dixon said. He kept his hands where everyone could see them. You're carrying sensitive materials that don't belong to you. There's a way to resolve that without anyone getting embarrassed. You give them to me, we make copy receipts for your records, you get home safe. No headlines, no lawsuits, no long drives to nowhere. Michael tilted his head. Receipts, he said, as if tasting the word for the first time. Absolutely, Dixon said. Chain of custody. We're professionals. Who's we? Michael asked. Dixon's smile didn't move. We, he said again, as if the pronoun were a badge. Think of us as the people whose jobs exist so other people's jobs are easier. Price spoke without turning his body. What happens if we don't? Dixon took half a step closer and lowered his voice. Not a threat, just a suggestion. Then this gets tedious. We follow. You worry. We pull you over for a turn signal and say we smell something that isn't there. You miss an exit and wind up at a checkpoint that didn't used to be on that road. The day gets long. The week gets longer. Sounds like harassment, Michael said. Sounds like process, Dixon corrected, still gentle. You can short-circuit it right now. Give the box to me. We'll even let you keep copies. You can write whatever story you like, and it won't be a fairy tale because you'll have paper to wave. Michael imagined handing over the box, imagined Carson's duplicate glowing on a shelf in a place with locks that weren't on a lease. He imagined Denver disappearing the way names sometimes do when the wind changes. Let me see your credentials, he said. Dixon's eyes warmed by 1 degree, as if he appreciated the performance. He produced a wallet badge without letting go of it. It flashed a seal that could have been printed on any of a dozen machines. Price didn't lean forward. Men who know how to read a room don't squint when a trick is being offered. Here's what happens, Price said, still looking at the pharmacy window like an old man with questions about formularies. We leave. You follow. We split. You pick one, maybe the wrong one. You learn something about us. We learn something about you. Or, Dixon said smoothly, you don't split, and we avoid wasting taxpayer dollars on a chase. Save the taxpayers, Price said. We insist on waste. Dixon's eyes cooled again. He nodded once, as if checking a box on a clipboard only he could see. It's a nice day, he said. Be a shame if your car had a mechanical issue 3 miles out. Michael smiled without humor. We keep up with maintenance. Of course, Dixon said, stepping back. We all try. He returned to the sedan. The 2 sidewalk men did nothing. They didn't have to. The message had already landed. Back at the car, Price opened the trunk and moved their bags with the slow attention of a man rearranging groceries. He lifted the box only an inch, then set it down again, then lifted a different bag and set it in the back seat. Decision time, he said quietly. Split? Michael asked. Split, Price confirmed. You take the car with the box. North Road, then west. Stop at mile marker 22, there's a pull-off with a windbreak. If you're clean, I meet you there by dusk. If you're not, you keep going and don't look for my lights. And you? Michael asked. I walk 2 blocks, buy a hat, catch the noon bus to the next town over. I pick up a rental in cash and run the shadow roads. If they follow me, they burn daylight. If they follow you, you'll know sooner than you want to. Michael's throat tightened. If neither of us sees the other by midnight? Denver, Price said. Carson's roof. After midnight, if the street is wet. Michael nodded. They closed the trunk and the doors with the same quiet they would have used if the street were asleep. Price adjusted his jacket, the tweed holding a shape even the wind respected. He touched Michael's shoulder with 2 fingers, a short blessing, a habit earned on other roads, and walked away without looking back. Michael watched him pass the hardware store, cut down a side street, and disappear behind a row of trucks. He sat in the driver's seat, key cold in his hand. Across the way, Dixon's sedan pulled out, then settled half a block behind him as if they had agreed on a dance. Michael started the engine. The car purred, grateful for easy work. He checked the mirror, then the side streets, then the sky, because even the sky can be useful sometimes. He pulled onto Main and let the town move around him. At the first stop sign, he turned left. At the second, right. At the third, straight, because sometimes the best misdirection is to do exactly what a stranger would do. At the edge of town, a train chugged across the road and made him wait. He counted the cars like people count rosary beads when they have nothing else to hold. When the gates lifted, he eased forward and let the county road take him north, flat, straight, honest as a lie told by a man who has practiced. In the mirror, Dixon's sedan followed at the same respectful distance, never eager, never lazy. Behind it, 2 cars back, the ladder rack truck fell into line, as if the road had only one correct speed and everyone suddenly remembered what it was. Michael touched the envelope in his pocket, the one Carson had pressed into his palm, the one meant for a shoe, not a pocket. He didn't move it. He didn't need luck yet. He needed daylight to run out of places to hide other people's decisions. At mile marker 12, he reached into the console and pulled a small, dented tin. He set it on the passenger seat. Inside lay a different kind of receipt, photos, numbers, a single copied page with a bell icon stamped at the top. He closed the lid and breathed out slowly. "Let's waste some taxpayer money," he said to the windshield, and pressed the gas. The county road ran straight as string, mile markers ticking by like quiet metronomes. 12, 14, 19. Michael kept the speed steady, eyes forward, mirrors in rhythm. Dixon's sedan held its place 2 car lengths back, polite as a neighbor who knows your schedule by heart. Farther behind, the ladder rack truck floated in and out of sight, never catching up, never falling away. At mile 21, the land shifted from flat to something with a little opinion, low swells, a windbreak of cottonwoods leaning into the same idea. Michael rolled his shoulders and loosened his grip without letting go. He could feel the pull-off before he saw it, a gravel crescent tucked behind the trees, the road curving just enough to hide whatever chose to sit in the shade. Mile 22. He flicked the signal for exactly 3 blinks and eased off the asphalt, tires crunching, dust lifting in a slow curtain that hung in the still air. The windbreak swallowed him. For a second, he was alone, no road, no tail, just the sound of gravel settling and the tick of cooling metal. Then he saw it. A sedan already parked nose in at the far end of the crescent, dark glass, empty driver's seat. The kind of car that could be anyone's until it became no one's. His pulse stepped up a notch. He cut the engine but kept his hands on the wheel, eyes on the mirror. Dixon's car glided past the pull-off without slowing, the driver's head never turning, as if he decided to honor Michael's privacy for the first time that morning. The ladder truck did the same, its shadow dragging like a tail. It should have made him feel safe. It didn't. Michael sat, counting. 30 seconds. A minute. The wind said nothing. He reached into the console and lifted the dented tin, photos, numbers, the bell icon page, then slid it under the passenger seat. If the trap was for him, it wouldn't be the kind that cared about paperwork. If the trap wasn't for him, he didn't want to carry someone else's story away by accident. A soft knock on the back window. He didn't jump. He turned slowly, keeping his face neutral, and saw a shape close to the glass, cap brim, sharp nose, round glasses catching a sliver of light. Price. Michael unlocked the doors and stepped out into the shade. Price moved fast but calm, the way men do when they've spent a life measuring when speed helps and when it kills. "You walked," Michael said. "Mostly," Price replied. "And got a ride the last mile from a man who didn't want to ask why." "Dixon?" Michael asked. "Busy following a ghost," Price said. He jerked his head toward the parked sedan at the end of the crescent. "That one belongs to them. It's empty on purpose." "A dead drop?" Michael asked. "A dead drop or a stage set," Price said. "Either way, we don't touch it." Michael glanced toward the road. Dixon's car was a dot now, the ladder truck a comma. The windbreak muffled their noise, turned the road into something that only existed for other people. "How'd you shake your tail?" Michael asked. Price smiled, tight and brief. "There was no bus." Michael frowned. "You said?" "I said I'd catch the noon bus," Price said. "The bus came. I didn't get on. 2 men did, hats low, collars high. The driver pulled out and headed west. I walked east and bought a hat anyway. Then I got into the back of a feed truck that had been parked behind the depot since dawn. The driver didn't work for anyone who wears a badge. That's enough about him." Michael let the picture snap into place. Dixon's people had followed the bus like good process. Price had ridden a different river under the same bridge. "And the pouch?" Michael asked. "The one this morning?" "Not theirs," Price said. "The handwriting was too clean and too deliberate. Whoever left it wanted us alert, not trapped. And they wanted Dixon to know we could be reached without his permission." He tapped the car roof with 2 fingers. "Which brings us to the mile 22 trap." "Trap for who?" Michael asked. "For me," Price said. "They won't pull you here. You've been the open handle. I'm the hinge." Michael looked again at the empty sedan at the end of the crescent. A thin wire ran from its front grille to a low branch. Not a tripwire, too obvious for that. A sight line. In the shade beyond, a small box sat on a stump, lens the size of a dime pointed at the driver's door of Michael's car. He hadn't seen it when he pulled in. He saw it now because he knew where to look. Camera, he said. Receiver, Price corrected. Short range. Real-time link to a notebook in a lap down the road. They wanted a picture of you opening your trunk and me putting something inside. Or me taking something out. Either way, a story they could tell later and make it look routine. Michael let out a breath. So we give them nothing. We give them something else, Price said. He reached into his jacket and pulled a folded bandana, wrapped around a lump the size of a plum. He unrolled it to show a steel cylinder with a magnetic bottom, the same sort of tag they'd found twice now, this one scarred and dented, as if it had been run over. Their language, he said. We speak it back. He walked to the trunk and opened it with his body blocking the camera's window. Michael stood between the lens and the gap, a wall made of a man. Price set the tag into the spare tire well beside the reel box, then took it back out and slid it into a footwell in the rear seat. He closed the trunk, opened the rear door, tucked a jacket over the footwell, then shut the door again. To the camera, Price said, we moved something. To Dixon, if he catches up and uses a handheld reader, the car will sing from the back seat. He'll think he's got the box pinned. Price paused, listening to the wind. We let him feel clever for 20 miles. Then we park at a busy grocery, let a kind stranger help us with a heavy bag, and the tag rides home under someone else's dog food. Michael nodded. And us? We take the box and walk, Price said. Through the trees, across the shallow wash. There's a service road on the other side that locals use to cut west to the highway. A farmer owes me a favor, and I have a phone number he answers from the cab of his combine. Michael lifted the box from the trunk. It felt heavier than it should, like it knew it was the heart in their chest. He set it down on the gravel and wrapped it in an old moving blanket, then slid it into a black contractor bag. Trash. Every county knows how to ignore a bag like that. You're sure Dixon won't check the trees? Michael asked. He'll be too busy celebrating, Price said. He'll tell a voice on the phone that we finally got smart enough to carry a tag again. And that voice will tell him to keep his distance so we don't spook. The ladder truck will drift closer, because that is what shadows do when they think they see a smaller shadow. They lifted the bag between them and moved through the windbreak on feet that knew how to soften gravel. 20 yards in, the road dropped away. A shallow wash cut through, a line of sand and weed that locals used as a footpath because asphalt doesn't always go where people actually live. On the far side, tire ruts climbed a low incline, then turned into the plain geometry of a service road. They crossed. The bag was awkward but not impossible. At the top of the rise, a pickup idled, door open, no driver. The keys hung from the column with a tag that read J. Marsh in block letters. Michael looked at Price. Price lifted 2 fingers in greeting at the empty cab, as if a man could feel thanks from a distance. Friend? Michael asked. Friend of a friend, Price said. Who doesn't like people who put cameras on stumps at family pull-offs? They slid the bag onto the bench seat between them and shut the doors. The engine sounded like a kitchen machine that had worked every morning of its life without complaint. Price checked the mirrors and pulled out, heading east first, because sometimes the best way west is to make sure you're not writing an obvious line for someone else to read. 5 minutes later, as the road curved back toward the highway, a dark sedan rolled past on the county road, steady as a clock hand. Michael pictured Dixon holding the handheld reader, seeing the soft glow from the back seat of a car that wasn't theirs anymore, and feeling the small pride that comes before a long confusion. Price's phone buzzed once. A single text from a number not in his contacts, tagged car heading north. See you at the roof if the street is wet. He put the phone face down. Not ours, he said. But not theirs. Michael kept his eyes on the road. The bag pressed against his leg, real as anything he'd ever carried. He thought of the bell tone, the word contact, the chair in the glass booth, The notebook pages that had been written by hands that never thought they'd be read by sunlight. He thought of Whitaker in the farmhouse doorway and Carson at the window with his hand on the blind cord. "Denver," he said. "Denver," Price agreed. They didn't look back. The mile 22 pull-off faded behind trees that had been planted to break wind and ended up breaking a chain of custody instead. The road ahead widened until it understood it would be an interstate soon. The day had edges again. They drove toward the roof they had been promised and the rain that would make it street safe.